Hey, what's up everybody? Kyle Buckland here with the Artful Souls. Hope you're doing great. Today we're going to be painting just a tree. Sometimes it's nice to just pick out a tree and just decide that that's going to be your center of interest for your painting, and you just want to tell a story about a tree. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And this type of composition is not really complicated because when you're doing a big landscape scene or a big vista, you have a lot of space to work with, which requires a lot of composing. But with this type of study, we're really just going to be focused on some big main shapes of this tree. And this is a great way to learn to draw trees. Trees are a great attribute to any landscape picture. So anytime that you feel like maybe you're having trouble with your trees, it would be a good idea to get outside and just pick a nice tree and sort of go about just representing that tree on your canvas as faithfully and as best you can. So that's what we're going to be up to today. I'm going to be trying to use some realistic colors here. I don't want to get too carried away with exaggerated colors. Again, this is just a faithful study of this tree here. And so because of that, I'm using a limited palette. So on my palette, I've got cadmium red light, cadmium yellow light, ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, and ivory black, and then of course titanium white. And we're going to take our medium. So in this cup I've got 2/3 Galkit painting medium mixed with 1/3 Gamsol thinner. We're going to take a little bit of that medium and we're going to put it into our white paint and just mix it up just a little bit, just to soften the paint. This will help the paint flow onto the canvas a little better and make color mixing a little bit more easy as we go along here. So you can do this with a palette knife or just an old paintbrush, whichever you have there. Either one will work. So now with this type of scene, again, I'm not so much worried about a masterful composition. I really just want to try to do a nice little study of this tree. So I'm going to start with a nice dark here that I'm mixing up with a little bit of ivory black, little cadmium red light, and a little ultramarine blue, just a nice dark, and just a little white so that it's not super dark. We want this to be sort of a dark gray. And I'm using a round, like a number 4 bristle, white bristle brush, and I'm painting on a oil primed linen panel. So you can paint on canvas, stretched canvas, or linen, stretched linen, or a canvas panel. Doesn't really matter just whatever your preference is. You can play around with different types of surfaces. So because I'm not trying to compose a complicated scene here, I just want to try to get an idea of how much of this tree I want to put into my picture. And a lot of times when we're painting trees, we feel this need to get the whole tree in our canvas. But that's not necessarily what we want to do. We want some of the tree to go out of the canvas. And if we can have the tree touch 3 sides of the canvas, that's even better, because it really ties everything together, rather than just having an isolated tree right in the middle of your canvas with all this space around it. So because of that, I am going to put the trunk of the tree down here, but I want to look and see, and so sometimes I'll start with just a loose drawing here of where this tree goes. So I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm just going to take this. There's 2 main trunks to this tree, and then some offshoots. And I want to try to get the 2 main parts of this tree drawn in here. There's sort of a little area here, and then this part of the trunk comes up in front of that one. So when you're drawing trees, pay attention to which branches are in front and which branches go behind. That's going to be really important. That comes up like this. Now watch how trees, they kind of fan out at the bottom. Especially big old trees like this, they have a huge root system, and it takes a lot of roots to hold them in the ground. So we're going to exaggerate that feeling of that, where the roots kind of fan out there at the bottom. And if you feel like you're having trouble with this part, you can even get out a pencil and paper or some charcoal and paper and just make a few sketches of some trees just to get the hang of drawing the way that they go, because there's definitely a rhythm to them. It's an organic rhythm, and once you get the hang of it, they become pretty easy to draw. But it takes a little bit of practice, so don't get discouraged if you're having trouble with this drawing part of the tree. Now, one thing I will note is that trees are wider at the bottom, and as they come up, they get slightly skinnier. This is generally true all the way throughout the tree. There might be a couple areas where it gets a little wider because of a big knot in the tree or something, but generally you want the widest part of the tree down here, and then as the trunks of the tree go up and out, they get a little smaller, or they split up and become smaller. Same thing with the branches. So let's see, we've got a branch coming off right here, and same thing with it. It goes out here and it's kind of thick, and then as it comes out it gets a little thinner. And then eventually it splits into two branches out there. But we want to keep that taper in there, because that's going to give our trees a nice organic feel. Now look here, we've got a branch that comes out right here, but it doesn't come out of the side of the tree. It actually comes out of the front of the tree and comes towards us a little, then turns and heads out to the side, but it's still coming out towards us a little bit, and then it finally kind of turns here and comes up like this. And this is because it's coming straight out towards us. So remember that some branches are not just going out to the side, but some go back and some come forward. So pay attention to that, because those branches are going to be important in giving a three-dimensional quality to your picture. And then there's a nice low branch here that comes out. And just draw that as a solid line. We'll fill in a lot of these details when we actually start painting, but right now we're just kind of doing like a contour drawing. Don't forget to take these branches out to the edge. Don't get scared by the edge of the canvas and think that you have to stop painting. Go ahead and let them come on out into the edge of the canvas there. Okay, so, you know, this is a basic drawing here of our tree. We've got the two main trunks and then a few main branches that come off of it. And now we want to get in the shapes of the background here. Now, there are some branches right here, so I don't want to make my background line up exactly with those branches. That would be a little confusing. So I'm going to make my tree tops right here, and then right in here. Now there's a big tree back there, but I think I'm going to leave it out, because I think it might confuse our eye here, where these branches are up against it. I want to keep that nice light behind these dark branches. So I'm going to leave that big tree out right here. So even though we're not doing a whole lot of composing here, we're still editing out things that don't help us. And then there's this hillside that kind of comes up right in here somewhere. And it does sort of cross over where this branch is. So I'm going to bring this branch down here a little bit so we don't get too confused, and we'll make the hillside right there. Now I'm going to take this cadmium red light and ultramarine blue and go back into that dark I was doing, mixing up. And I'm dipping into my medium here to thin this paint out. Over here I've got my brush washer, and it's full of just Gamsol paint thinner, so that's what I'll be cleaning my brushes in as I go. I'm going to mix up a nice warm purple. These trees have a nice warm quality to them. And then I'm going to go ahead and mass in my dark shape of my tree. So if you remember from the beginner videos, this is where we were using the paper towel just to select some big shapes. We're doing the same thing here, but we're using a brush now. Now that might be a little bit too purple, so to gray it down I'm going to add just a little bit of yellow ochre. And because yellow is the complementary color to purple, that's going to gray things down a little bit. Might even add a little bit of white to that. Come back over top of it, just to gray it down just a little bit. We still want that warm purple color, but we don't want it to be super purple. Remember I said I was actually going to try to keep some realistic color here. Now the other trunk is behind it is a little bit darker. It's catching a little less light, so a little ivory black, a little more ultramarine blue, and that's going to give us a slightly darker tone for this trunk back here. So I'm shifting the value, you know, how dark or how light is it. We want to pay attention to areas where things get darker and lighter. There are even some darker spots, like under this branch here, it gets a little darker. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that in there. Some little spots in between here where it's dark, and this little branch is dark here. Now notice how I'm using my brush. As I come out, I'm starting thick, and then as I come out here, I let off the pressure of the brush, and the branch actually gets a little thinner. Do the same thing here. And that's helping me draw that organic quality. Now there's some smaller branches in there, but we won't worry about them right now. We'll go ahead and lay in our background before we do that. Remember, we want to start with big shapes and then work to smaller shapes. So let's go ahead and get our sky back there. I'm going to use yellow ochre and a little bit of this titanium white, dip it into my medium. There's some warm areas back there, but I don't want it super warm. I want to gray it down just a little bit, so I'm going to add a touch of ivory black to that. I want to pay attention to where my tops of my trees are here. I just want to come down to the tops of the trees with this. And I don't want to cut into my tree trunks too much, because my brush is going to pick up that dark paint and it's going to start changing the light tone that I'm using here. This is a nice warm gray. And we can bring this up into the sky a little bit, and then we'll cool it off and we'll come down with a more cool gray and work right back into it. Now little bits of this dark aren't going to mess us up if they get in the sky. In fact, let's add a little bit more yellow ochre to that, and we'll bring this gray on up in here, this warm gray. Now notice as I'm painting up against these branches, I'm kind of carving into them just a little bit. I don't want to get so afraid of that dark paint that I leave a white spot between the sky and the branch. I want to make sure I'm painting right up to it, and if I have to cut into it just a little bit, that's fine. If you have enough medium on your brush and enough paint on your brush, this is not going to be too much of a problem. Now I'm darkening the value of this as I come up into the sky just a little bit. And we don't want this sky to be all one tone. We want it to have some variation in it. So to do that, let's mix a little bit of this purple, a little ultramarine blue into this purple, and then I'm going to throw some white right into it. So this is going to give us a nice cool gray. So get this nice cool tone. Now what I want is this to be this very similar value. So same darkness and lightness as my yellow. And I'm going to mix it right in and start up here at the top and kind of work it down into some of these areas. Now if we cover up some of these branches, it's okay, because we're going to come back and put them back in there. Now I'm going to come right back into my yellow and let it mix just a little bit with that yellow, so that we have different types of grays going on in the sky. Some cool and some are warm, and we can even lighten this cool gray a little bit with some more white and put it in down here where the sky gets a little lighter. Just in a few spots to kind of break up the monotony of that gray. Now before we get too carried away with any other parts, let's keep moving on. It's like putting together a big puzzle. We want to cover up all this white canvas, because the white will confuse us. So I'm going to make this nice purple, cadmium red light and ultramarine blue, and make a nice purple, a little bit more ultramarine blue. And I'm going to add just a touch of yellow, cadmium yellow light to this, to make it just a little bit more of a warmer blue. Or a warmer purple. And that's actually still too purple. I don't want this to be too close to the tree. I'm going to add a little bit more ultramarine blue and a little bit of white to that. I want this to be nice and light, but not so light that it competes with the light of the sky. So something like this right here. Now, you know, there's a lot of different colors back there in the trees, but because we're trying to simplify things, this is not a painting about those trees in the background. This is a painting about this tree up here. So I'm not going to get too carried away with all these different colors back there. Right now, I just want to put this back here as a tone, this blue, just to kind of lay it in and get that white covered up. We might add just a few little bits of a green, so yellow ochre and ultramarine blue. It's going to give us this kind of dulled down green. And don't want it to be too dark either, so maybe a little bit of cadmium yellow light and a little bit of white. And then we'll just hit this in a couple little spots back here, just to suggest a little play of light on this blue, just a little bit. So I'm gonna leave it right there. We'll come back and work on that later. But let's move on to the grass now. Cadmium yellow light. Still using the same brush. I'm just cleaning it in between. So this is like a number 4 or number 5 flat bristle brush. So cadmium yellow light, and I had some of that blue on my brush still, so that's making it a nice light green. This is what we want here. Now, we have to be careful because the sun is coming out and then it's going back behind clouds. One thing you don't want to do is chase the changing effects. So set out in your mind what you want to do, and then make sure you kind of stick to that. So I don't want to get my green too bright, because I want this to stay kind of a cloudy scene here. And if we got too much yellow, on there, it's going to just start to look weird because of the cloudy sky and the darkness of the tree. So I want to keep this toned down. And again, there's a lot of variation in the grass, different types of grass, areas where it's darker or lighter, little shadows of things here and there. But because we're just laying in our painting, I want to try to keep it pretty simple. There's a funny acronym. I think I heard this somewhere or popped into my head. If any of you all know where it came from, maybe you can enlighten me in the comments. But it's KISS, K-I-S-S. And it stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. And this is something that I tell myself sometimes, because it's easy to try to complicate things when you're painting and overthink things. And you get carried away with this or that, and then before you know it, you've lost that fresh quality that is often found in really nice paintings. And that just comes from thinking too much and overworking things. So remember, if you start to get too carried away, just remember that KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. So I added some darker green down by the bottom there. But not enough to suggest like sunlight and shadow. Just a little hint of some darker greens. And I want to pay attention to this drawing right along the bottom here, because this is important. This tree actually comes out right there because of its roundness. And I don't want to neglect that. That's an important part of this drawing. That comes down, then comes back up. And there's this dark that kind of comes up in here. And then there's some of these little areas where these roots come out into this green. So we can draw them out, and then we can paint the green back over it just a little bit. Now, I'm going to come back with my little round brush, or it's like a number 4 round, and I'm going to redraw some of the tree. So now, it's like you draw it, then you paint it in, come back and redraw it, because you're going to lose some of the drawing when you're painting in, especially if you're massing in big places. Massing in big shapes like I want you to. Now these branches are all over the place, and you can get carried away with painting way too many branches. So make sure you're paying attention to which branch you're painting when you're painting a tree branch. it's easy to lose track when you're glancing up and then you're glancing back. It's easy to start to lose track of which branches you're actually painting. And a great example of that is what I just said. I actually just did it as I was talking about it. So I'm going to come back and paint out this branch right here. It doesn't need to be there. That's actually that branch that's coming from that other trunk. So I'll paint it out like that. And see, this is what's cool about using a lot of medium in your paint and lots of paint on your brush, is if you don't like something, just come back and paint it out. And if you use a light touch and a lot of paint on your brush, it should just paint right over it. So there's some smaller branches now. We can go ahead and start to introduce some of these smaller branches. Some of these we can just do with like what I call a branch screen, which is where we take a value that's slightly darker than the sky, but slightly lighter than the actual branches. And we just pop that in just in a couple little places like that right there, even some up here. This creates the illusion of a bunch of little tiny branches. It's like you're looking through all these branches to this big, to the sky, and it darkens the sky a little bit. So we can pop these in and then we'll draw some little branches that come out to them. Now let's look, are there areas on the tree that get a little lighter? And there are. Right in here, it comes up from the bottom, it's a little bit lighter. Not that light though. I want to control my value, so I'm going to darken that just a little bit. We're working with these grays, and I'm mostly picking up colors that I've already used on the palette and adding to them. So if I need them to be a little lighter, I'll add a little white. If I want them to be a little warmer, I might add a little cadmium yellow red, or cadmium red light, just to get the tones that I'm looking for. So now we're drawing this lighter tone here. And there's sort of this little bit of edge lighting that hits parts of these trees. Now, when the sunlight comes out, it's really noticeable, but I don't want to have that happen, so I just want a touch of this light. Just right along the edge, the top edge of this branch is getting a nice little bit of this light. And then right along some of the edges here. So this is where the branches are, where we can see the tops of the branches. They're catching this lighter tone. You'll notice that too, that as when branches are going away from you and you can see the tops of them, they catch like a lighter tone on the top. But as branches come out towards you, for example, we'll do one here, a dark one. We'll mix this up with cadmium red light, ultramarine blue, and a touch of that ivory black. Now watch, we've got a branch that comes out right here. A little bit darker. Now, if you have enough medium on your brush, and you do it in one touch, it should just glide right on. You should be able to paint right through the sky. So that's a darker branch because it comes out there towards you. Same thing with this part of this branch here where this comes out. We're looking at the underside of the branch, which makes it darker. Now notice that I'm not getting carried away with anything. I haven't painted a lot of detail into this painting, but we're getting a sense of light and atmosphere and of nature. I want to just hint at a few little bits of shadow, little clumps of grass down in here. And there's even a few warm spots. So I'm going to get this warm cadmium red light mixed back into this purple that I was using, this grayish purple for the tree, and mix a nice little, because there's little spots here that are warm where we're seeing through to the grass. Now as I'm doing this, I want to dull down that blue back there. It's just a little bit too blue. I'm going to add some ultramarine blue to a dark reddish purple here and make a nice darker blue that I'm going to pop in areas here. Now I might not cover up all that light blue. Maybe I want to leave just a little bit in the back in some areas that'll help push some of these areas back into the distance a little bit. So as the trees go back, they get a little bit lighter. You see that? And then there's also some hints of little fields out there. So just a touch of this light green that's already on here that I was using for my grass. I'm going to lighten it up just a little bit, and then just pop in a couple little areas there. Little fields back there in the distance. Now, because this is a painting about the tree, let's finish the tree and then decide how much further we want to go with other parts. So now I'm going to use a small, like a rigger brush, a little liner brush. So this is a synthetic brush, and it's got a nice long round bristle on it, and it's going to make nice lyrical types of brush strokes. So we want to figure out, well, what branches do we want? We can pick and choose. We don't have to put every single branch on here, but there are some that are really nice and add to the effect of this tree that I like a lot. This branch comes up here. This is really nice. This comes up here, turns like this, and then goes out to the edge. And it's got a couple places where branches come off of it like that. Make it a little wider right there. And then bunch of branches that come off of this one. But I'm not going to paint every single branch, okay? And notice how I'm holding this brush too, real light grip. I'm holding it between my fingers like this, and I'm drawing it out from where I want to start the line, and then I just kind of let it I just kind of pull up and out as I'm moving, and that gives that nice taper. And because we don't have a lot of strong color in this painting, it's really a painting about sensitive drawing and values. So we want to pay attention at this point and make sure that our lines make sense. It's like when you get off the hook in one area of your painting, you have to pay attention to another area. So, you know, I'm not having to think about complicated color schemes here. Again, the color is sort of, I don't want to say mundane, because it's still, you know, beautiful in its own sense, but it's just definitely a toned down type of painting compared to some of my more colorful pieces. And so we can vary the color slightly. So I'm going to add a little of this yellow-green to my reddish-brown here that I was using for my branches. Just to add just a slight variation in tone. Some of this branch here has a little lighter area where it's catching the light on the top. And I want to get some of these little wacky branches that come out here. They're very descriptive, and this tree has a very interesting look to it, where it's old and it's been around a while. It's got some character to it. So these little tiny branches are going to help add that character to it. Now watch, let's make sure we're taking these branches up and over our background, because that's going to help push the background back. So don't be afraid to paint, you know, one thing over another. And there are some places in between here where there are some branches that cross over in this little section here, and that one kind of comes out and back around that way. Then there's another one. Let's see where this is in relation to everything else that I'm painting. See, it's nice to keep an eye on different parts of your painting, make sure you're not lost. You start painting one area, and then before you know it, you're looking at the wrong branch, and then you go, oh, wait a minute, that's not that branch, I was over here. So don't lose track of where you're at when you're painting these branches. Try to look at the whole branch and see where it goes, and then get back in there with your paintbrush and paint it, because otherwise you're going to get lost and you're going to lose track of where you're at. I'm going to give some little descriptive lines down here. There's some branches that have fallen off, and I don't see a whole lot down there, but there are some out in the field in other places. So I can kind of use them as a model, just to kind of help create a little interest down here below the tree. So I am picking and grabbing from different places. You guys know from watching the videos, I'm not always painting exactly what I see. A lot of times I'm improvising and adding little things here and there to help the picture. So, just like we looked for some lighter areas on the tree trunks, let's look for some darker areas. We can take black and go right back into our purple. Again, I'm not too concerned about having a lot of fancy color in this. So, you know, it's okay to use black sometimes as a nice accent. Lots of medium on my brush. And then we'll come back. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow ochre to this black to get a nice dark olive green color, because I see that in there. It's like this moss. And then I'm going to come back and pop it in certain areas. Now, we don't want to paint completely over what's there, just little spots, little touches to add variation to what we've got going on here. Now, we've got another branch here that comes out, so there's two branches down here. I don't want to complicate things, so I think I'm going to leave it like I've got it. I've only got one of them painted in there. I don't want to get too confused with what's going on there with the drawing. Some little yellow flowers in the field, not a lot though. Don't want to make this a painting about yellow flowers. But I do want to add just some little touches of yellow down here. There's also some little touches of red, where some leaves have fallen down. And just a few little spots to look nice down there. There are leaves falling as we're painting, so just to grab, I'm just going to snag a couple of those. And just pop them in. You wouldn't think to do this, but it adds a nice organic look to your painting to have just a couple little free-floating spots here and there. Kind of gives you a sense of the wind blowing around, different things happening. There are also some little areas where some of these smaller branches are catching the light, and just creating a little bit of a lighter tone that we can pop in here in little places. We've got some leaves in the middle, some vines growing up. Again, I don't want to get carried away. So ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, and a little ivory black. This is like a number 2 filbert bristle brush I'm using now. And I'm going to get little bit of thicker paint on here. Might add a little bit of cadmium yellow light to that just to get it to green up just a little bit. And a little bit thicker paint now, not a whole lot thicker. And just hit some little areas in here where this green is. Kind of comes along in here. Some areas. Now the sun's coming out, so I want to be careful not to get tempted to paint too much sunlight into this painting. These vines grow around these branches and they create sort of like a texture along the edge. So we can suggest that just a little bit in places, like right in here. Just to give a feeling of where those vines are growing up the tree. And then there's some spots up in here where there's some little leaves still hanging on. Not a lot of leaves on this tree, so it's kind of out in the middle of the field here, and I imagine some strong winds come through, and we're getting near to the end of summer, so it's starting to take off some of these clumps of leaves, and we don't want to paint too many leaves on it because it's got a nice feel to it the way it is. I don't like that light green back there of my field. It's distracting, so I'm going to paint it out. I'm going to darken that blue just a little bit. So we're adjusting things as we go, and that's how this works. You know, we start big and bold, and then we can adjust as we go and change things however we need them to be. Some little areas here where we'll put some little darker spots in the grass. Well, this is fun. Like I said, it's fun to just go out and pick a tree, and it's almost like portrait painting, you know, where you have a sitter sitting for you and you just want to do a portrait of a person. Except if you don't get everything right where it goes, the tree's not going to get mad at you. It was John Singer Sargent that said the definition of a portrait is a painting that has something wrong with the mouth. And that's one thing I like about painting trees, is you don't have to worry about flattering them. You want to do your best, but if everything's not perfect, it's not a big deal. And great for practice. I want to add some smaller branches. I'm getting close now. I don't want to take this thing too far and ruin it. You know, I always say that it's better to stop while you're ahead and have something that's just a little underworked than overworking something. You can always come back later, and it's a good idea. Maybe when you're out, snap a photograph of the tree, and then you can come back later if you want to and add a few little things. But you might decide that you like what you got, and just for the sake of doing a little study, you're going to leave it how it is. One of the biggest things that happens to people when they start painting is they have these expectations in their mind of these grand paintings, and they see other artists that are painting, you know, beautiful, massive paintings, and we want to try to skip ahead, but when we're first learning to paint, we should be very content with just some very modest, simple studies, because this is, you're building up your arsenal of information to draw from when you get to painting a big, large painting. So you can't sidestep this stage. And the best thing that you can do is embrace it and have fun just trying to do some simple things. And then experiment, play around. Obviously this is a slightly different palette than I've painted with in some of these videos. A lot of the same colors that I've used, but some colors are missing. So we're not using burnt sienna here, and we don't have the phthalo blue or the permanent matter. So try switching things up from time to time too. There's little hints of yellow in this tree, but just a little bit of playful color in there. There are some nice light tones back here in the sky now. This is why we don't go too light right away. We held this, remember when I first laid in the sky, it was sort of a toned down gray. So now we can come back with some light paint. Still not completely white, but a little lighter than what we have there, and we can add just a slight bit of variation to those clouds back there. A little bit of edge lighting. Just a little bit goes a long way. Now watch how I can draw the edge of this branch with this light color. I can give it some character. We can do the same thing in different areas. So we can come back in here and see these branches that a lot of times they're not completely straight. They have little indentions, little spots. Give it more of a organic character. I want to draw some of this grass up and around the base of the tree. So we're going to come back in here with our green, this dark green that's already on the palette. A lot of times I look and see if I have colors that I can use that are already on the palette. I'm going to add just a little bit of white. So rather than mixing a whole new green, I'm just using the green that's already there. A little bit of cadmium yellow light. Just enough to suggest some of this texture of this grass and the way it kind of hugs around the tree here. Even starts to grow up into little spots like that right in there. That's too light, so I want to add some lighter areas here, but not that light. Just a little bit of lightness up here, because the tree is starting to catch more light as it comes out from behind the shadow of this other tree. So even though there's not direct shadows, because there's not direct sunlight, we still have some sense of there being a little bit more light on that front tree and less light on that back trunk there. And as this comes up here, it catches a little bit more light. And there's a little bit of a texture to the bark we can play with if we want. We can add just a little bit of some dark lines down in here. Because we're not playing with a lot of color, again, we can make this drawing a little bit more sensitive to add a little bit more interest to the piece. Grab some light green here. We can use the back of the brush to scrape in a few lighter branches. So there are some branches down here that are catching a little bit of light. Just scrape those out, especially up against this darker background that's going to show up good. So like right in there. And then even some that maybe come up here in front of this tree trunk. Just in a few little places. That's definitely one of those things though, like where a couple little ones look good, but it'd be really easy to overdo it. So be careful. It's like donuts. One or two and you're good. You eat a whole dozen, you're in trouble. I'm a big fan of donuts. Just a little bit more variation in this foreground here, just creating a little bit more push and pull, a little bit of texture, some little accents down in there. Because what's happening is as the grass is moving back away from us, we're seeing less detail, so that it appears like it's getting smoother. So there's less shadow and light. There's a little bit back in here, and then all the way back we get, almost just a smooth green tone. And that helps create a sense of depth in our piece. I'm going to get some little bit of contour line going along the edge of this tree trunk. So a nice dark here, nice cadmium red light and ultramarine blue. And this can add a little bit of character too to the tree. A little dark contour line right along the edge in areas. You don't want to outline the entire tree. I mean, you could if you like that look, but that's going to start to make it look more like a comic book. it's a very graphic way of painting. I've seen some neat paintings, like illustrators like Frank Schoonover and N.C. Wyeth and those guys, Harvey Dunn. A lot of those painters used lines around objects to create a more dynamic look to them. But you got to remember too, a lot of those were illustrating, and their paintings were being turned into little tiny, almost monochromatic color plates in books and newspapers and magazines. So they a lot of times had to exaggerate a lot of stuff, including contour lines, to get that to get their paintings to read well from a distance. So just play around with it. I like a little bit of it here and there. I've seen some painters really use it in a very good way. Now there's some, notice that there are some branches that I've got in here that have some variation. Like this one's got this little bit of light here and then this dark here, but then there are some branches over here that I left kind of stained in. So that helps create variation in our tree. And it's a little bit more selective in how we view the piece too, so it's not like every single area is completely finished. That's on purpose. You don't want to finish every single area of your piece. I'll get really close now. Like I said, this is just a study of a tree. I might add a few little bit more touches of these leaves here and there. And because there's a little bit more weight on the left side of this piece, I'm going to sign it on the right, just to balance it out a little bit. I'm going to take a nice warm tone here. And as I'm doing this, I want to say thanks so much for watching. As always, don't forget to hit subscribe and click the bell for notifications if you haven't already. We've got a lot of new subscribers in the last little bit, so I want to welcome all my new subscribers and say thanks so much for watching. I've got extra content over on my Patreon page, which the link for that is in the description below. It's just $1 a month or more. It's just $1 a month gets you access to all the extra content, and if you want to contribute more, you're welcome to. And also, as I always tell you, make sure you're having fun. So if you're out there painting, whether you're first starting or if you've been watching the videos for a couple years and you're out there getting the hang of things and working on painting, don't forget the most important ingredient to this thing is to relax and let yourself learn. And by that I mean, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Don't be tied to making that perfect painting every single time. Let yourself experiment, let yourself play, change things up, try different colors, different paint brushes, different surfaces. Creativity doesn't work well when it's constrained. So even though I'm teaching you certain ways to do things, don't think that this is the only way or this is the way that you have to do it because Kyle said to do it like that. Experiment with breaking the rules. That's the fun about art. It's one of the few areas where sometimes you can excel by doing unconventional things and breaking the rules, so to speak. So get out there, push some paint around, have a good time, and thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon at the next video.